My other job is a life celebrant or a funeral officiant. This is my funeral suit. Do you know what that is? Do you know what a life celebrant is? Most people don't. Basically, I'm an MC or master of ceremonies at funerals. I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable, but it's actually a fascinating job. And I got into it because of some bizarre experiences that led me down this road. Where shall I start? Let me see. Basically, I am not a clergyman. I don't know whether you're aware of that. I am not a clergyman, and I don't espouse any religious or spiritual beliefs. I have my own beliefs, but I keep them to myself. And people come to me and ask me to be the master of ceremonies at a funeral. And while it's a field of endeavor that is relatively new and most people have not heard of it, it's getting bigger all the time. And I can promise you that probably in the next year, someone you know will have either a funeral or a wedding or a child naming ceremony handled by someone like me. Why is that? Well, it is in part because Canadians are becoming more and more ambivalent, if not distrustful, of organized religion. And that's not because they are not spiritual. However, recent polling in Ontario shows that about 85% of us have no specific religious, got to be careful how you use your words, religious affiliation. In fact, only about 4% of Ontarians attend a religious service on a regular basis. That includes synagogues, churches, temples, mosques. We are becoming increasingly a secular society. Now, what happens often, as you could probably imagine, when a crisis occurs in one's life, we tend to fall back to where we were as children, and we tend to go back to our religions. But more and more people are considering alternatives because falling back to these customs is often dissatisfying. And I wish it wasn't, but it often is. And I know this firsthand because training to become a celebrant, I decided to take a job in the funeral business. I was a professional pallbearer. I still am. Once in a while, someone hires me to come and pretend that I know the deceased, and I carry the casket around. It's actually very commonplace. People get old, and they need someone like me to carry the casket around. And so I've had a chance to observe funerals, a lot of them close hand. And I can tell you straight up, Canadian clergy, or the clergy that I have been exposed to, are dropping the ball when it comes to running funerals. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. In fact, the person who trained me as a celebrant is a fundamentalist Christian preacher, and he would agree with me vehemently on this issue. And I wish it wasn't the case. The problem is ultimately, at least in my experience observing the situation, the problem is ultimately systematic. A lot of clergy people are overworked. They have big congregations to run. They have all kinds of material concerns to deal with on a daily basis. And someone who strolls into the church or strolls into the synagogue or whatever on a semi-casual basis darkens the door of their place of worship, if you will, on a very, very infrequent basis. Well, often that preacher, let's say, is not going to know that person's name. He may try to remember it, but chances are he's not going to. He's got other things going on in his life. So the dude, the fella who shows up for Christmas, who shows up for Easter, sits in the back, minds his own business, and then splits, not too many people are going to remember him. They're not going to have a connection with him. So when that man or that person dies, and the funeral director calls up the place of worship and says to the clergy person, would you please come and officiate the funeral? There's not a connection there. And that is the beginning of the problem. The next problem is that that clergyman may be extremely busy and doesn't have a chance to even call the family of the deceased to get a couple of details about this person's life. He's walking into that funeral cold and he's winging it. He's got a couple of sermons on the side that he may have slapped together for other events such as this. For the most part, he doesn't even know the deceased or what that person brought to this life, and that's a shame. And I'm not blaming anybody, and I'm not pointing any fingers. It's just the way it is. I wish it wasn't, but it's just the way it is. So that person goes in. I remember being at one funeral where the pastor didn't get the name of the deceased right when he was delivering the eulogy. And that's a shame. The other problem is sometimes certain clergy have decided that funerals should be God-centered instead of people-centered. Why there has to be some sort of distinction, I don't know, but they have made that distinction. I have seen Catholic priests refuse to deliver a eulogy. They pull out the Mass of the Dead, they've got their nose in a book, they recite it, close the book, thank you very much, and it's not very satisfying at all. And that's a shame. The worst I ever experienced was at the funeral of my lovely aunt, who was 83, and much beloved by a very large family, but she developed dementia in her remaining years, and she spent most of the end of her life in a long-term care facility, which means she lost touch with the church where she had been brought up. And so the funeral director called the chaplain to the long care facility, and he showed up. And he was the guy who got the name wrong. And it was awkward, to say the least. He got up there, and he talked a lot about how good it was that my aunt had given her heart to Jesus, and how the rest of you better give your heart to Jesus. And in the end, he talked about how if you wanted to give your heart to Jesus, he would be in the back of the room to offer prayers of salvation and redemption. And it was not at all satisfying, not at all. But we were able, and I say we, not just me, we were able to save that funeral by singing some songs. My dad sings bass. My cousin Nancy is a beautiful alto. My Uncle Ben plays harmonica, and I play guitar. And we got together and we sang a couple of sacred songs. And it was actually kind of lovely. And there was a sense at that moment that something sacred was happening, and boom, that's what everyone was looking for. And it was at that moment when I decided that, yes, indeed, I do want to be a celebrant. I want everybody to know that funerals are meant to be beautiful. They are a tribute to life. And they are a reminder that our time here is short. And that we should, in fact, love each other. And we should support each other at the bad times. And we should remember each other even unto death. That's what they're there for. And everybody knows this. I don't have to tell you this. You know, I can see you nodding. This is not new insight for you. It's just that we forget these things in the rigmarole of life and all the problems that ensue. And so it's up to somebody to remind us. And that's what a celebrant does. Someone is to remind you about these things. And that's why I'm a celebrant. I'm going to sing you a couple of songs that I might sing at such a ceremony, because that's my job today. I'm not just a man with a nice tie. I'm also the musical entertainer today. But I just want, before I do sing, I want to just point out one thing to you, and that is funeral directors are also extremely busy people, and they're under a lot of stress. And their life and their job can be very, very, very angst-ridden and difficult. So a lot of them have two clergy persons in their Rolodex. They have Ted the preacher and Steve the reverend. One of them wears a blue tie and keeps it short and sweet. The other one wears a gray tie with a slight pink pattern in it, and he's a little bit more sentimental, and those are the only options you got if you don't have a pastor of your own. And I'm just simply saying to you right now that you actually have choices. Not just for yourself, but for anyone in your family. And you can ask for other choices. And if you get some pushback, just remind them who's paying the bills, because you deserve to have ritual in your life, and you deserve to have them be meaningful and spiritual and uplifting. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you very much.